Haven't spoken for quite a while, so I'm delighted to say that our first guest this morning is Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative MP, Brexit Party MEP, of course, as well. Anne, a very good morning to you.
Morning to you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, I mean, I wish it was a slightly more auspicious-looking day out there as I gaze upon the Tower of London and the various sights of the skyline. But it should be Freedom Day. I see no reason why it's not, really. And we now know, in fact, that Matt Hancock did not give the right information to Boris Johnson about how successful the vaccination programme was. Otherwise, we might, in fact, be lifting everything today.
Well, I asked myself this question. Supposing at the very start of the pandemic, we had been where we are now, that we'd had a working vaccine with 80% of the adult population actually vaccinated, that we'd had 6 deaths, that we had very low levels of hospital admissions. If we had been in that position, we would never have had a lockdown. We would never, ever have had a lockdown. So I don't understand why, now that the link is broken between catching the disease and dying from it, or catching the disease and ending up in hospital. Now that link is broken. There's no possibility of the NHS being overwhelmed. Why are we still all being told to cower in funk holes instead of saying, yippee, the enemy's in retreat, let's get out of here?
Exactly right. I was listening to some figures this morning, Anne, and if you compare, say, for example, at the moment we have about 1,000 people in hospital with coronavirus. Back in the first lockdown, the high point was 14,000, right, at any given time. And in January, when it was worse, it was 34,000 people in hospital. Yeah. So 1,000 is like a tiny little blip on the horizon, if you like. And so the idea that we're suddenly now afraid to open up the economy is nonsense, isn't it?
Well, it is total nonsense, but I'm afraid it has characterised this government's approach from the time that Boris Johnson came back from hospital having had COVID himself. And until then, he was actually quite bullish, and he was talking about land of liberty and all this sort of stuff. And ever since then, the government and the scientists, and probably also the civil servants, though we hear less about them, have been engaged in covering their own posteriors, basically. That's what it's about, is so that they can't be blamed for any deaths that arise when we could all have been locked down and not dying. That is actually what is behind this. It is pathetic, and I have said so many times in my excellent Daily Express column.
Well, listen, there's nothing like praising your own column, Anne, and I'm very pleased. Why don't you tell us when we can read it while you're at it?
Yes, you can read it every Wednesday, generally on page 13.
Excellent. Very good. Glad to hear it. No, I agree. It is an excellent column, and you're, as I say, a very redoubtable foe for anybody who wants to mix it up with you. But what I wonder is whether Boris Johnson is now kind of in the thrall of these sage people who seem to have taken over without any suggestion that anybody wants them to take over. They now appear to be advising him on everything from, whether to lift the lockdown or whether to make moves on climate change, whether, there's all sorts of things they seem to be advising the government on. And we don't really know who any of these people are.
Indeed. And I don't think he's enthralled to them. I think he's enthralled to his own cowardice. And also, the scientific advice has been very selective. When this business began, you may remember the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yes.
There was a debate amongst scientists as to the way forward, and it was an open debate, and people took very strong views either way. But we've got away from that completely now, and all we have is one view, and that view is always the most pessimistic view. This is government by pessimism.
It really is. And also we talk about, caution, and we hear them say we must save lives and we can't allow other people to die. But there are many, many more thousands of people now dying as a result of the lockdowns, as a result of the ridiculously long waiting lists now in the NHS for everything else. People have spoken to me on this very show about friends of theirs, relatives of theirs who have now died from stage 4 cancer because they weren't diagnosed last year because they couldn't get to see anybody.
Yes, and every time I hear the government talking about, lives are more important than money, the choice is not binary. If the economy collapses as a result of all of this, and every week that we stay in lockdown, more businesses are going bankrupt, or more businesses are getting close to that line. There isn't a binary choice between lives and the economy, because poverty itself threatens life, because the mental health issues that have arisen from lockdown threaten life. And I know of a case, absolutely directly know of a case where somebody did take his life because he couldn't endure another lockdown. And so it's not a binary choice. It sounds good, doesn't it? Oh, we're saving lives.
Yeah, it does.
It sounds good, but, the reality now is very different.
Well, exactly right. And then the more we learn as well as time goes on, Anne, Talk Radio, and you've probably been the same in your column, we've been questioning an awful lot of government policy. Yeah. We haven't been saying it doesn't work. We haven't been saying, we don't believe that there's a COVID disease. We haven't been saying any of that, but we have been asking questions. The mask debate still goes on. There's no real proof whether masks do any good at all. A lot of people, I think, today will be disembarking from the mask debate altogether and just chucking them away. We now don't really know whether social distancing is of any good whatsoever. We also now don't know whether these ridiculous perspex screens might actually be counterproductive. All the things that we questioned are now coming home to roost, it seems.
Well, I think if you want a real indication as to how serious it is to mask wearing, just look at the G7 summit. There were the leaders who are imposing on their citizens a highly restricted way of life, insisting that they wear masks, insisting that they keep a social distance. There were our leaders at the G7 summit, patting each other on the back, right up close, not a mask in sight. And therefore one presumes, since they wouldn't willingly put themselves in danger, that actually there is a limited value to mask wearing. Now, I have throughout this pandemic said, what we need is for the government to trust citizens to make their own judgments. And so, for example, if you're sitting in a very highly packed tube train, you might feel safer in a mask. But if you're alone in a carriage on a train and there's nobody within 12 feet of you, let alone 6 feet, why would you bother? Why can't we make our own judgments?
Yes.
Well, I have been actually throughout the whole thing.
And I think an awful lot of people have been as well. And I saw a picture of somebody that I'm a follower of on Twitter. He was on one of the boats, those clipper boats that go up and down the Thames. And he actually put a tweet out saying he was forced to wear a mask by the people on the boat, despite the fact that he was sitting outside and there was nobody else on it. And you just go, what's that
ludicrous.
about?
Just ludicrous. Yeah.
Absolutely idiotic. But what's it going to take, do you think, for the switch to finally be flicked, if you like, inside Boris's head? Because, he could find a reason to stop lifting the lockdown every single day if he wanted to, because he just has to grasp at another straw that's handed to him by Chris Whitty, who will say, there might be a third wave coming. Well, there might be a meteor strike. Who knows? There could, a number of things could happen.
And for a dead certainty, there will be more variants over
course.
time. No, are we going to go into a panic every time there's a new variant? And so, I think he's got to find courage. But one thing that has been lacking, of course, has been a real opposition. And I understand entirely why right at the beginning Keir Starmer decided to back the government, because when you have situations of national emergency, then there is a tradition that, the two parties in Parliament at least try to cooperate. But this has gone on a very long time. There's been no dispute from the opposition about the science, about figures, about anything like that. All they will say is he should have taken even more stringent measures. The only thing that they have been effective on, as far as I can see, is criticising the absolutely hopeless mess that our borders policy became. The sight of people coming back into the country from to Heathrow, and regardless of where they'd come from, all mixing together, and then, of course, being separated according to which countries they'd come from. Well, by then it's too late.
I know.
Absolute folly. And the government has got so much wrong. But the thing that does drive me mad is Boris likes to think of himself as Churchill. Everybody thinks Boris has got woomph and go, and I used to think that. In fact, he is a complete coward in the face of this emergency.
Yes, I'm afraid he has been running away from it at every single opportunity. Stay with us, Anne, for a moment. We just have to take a short break. Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative MP, columnist for the Daily Express, of course. Very excellent column every Wednesday on page 13. Come with us, Anne. I guess if you're Sir Keir Starmer, you can be happy, though, this weekend in the knowledge that you've now managed to get somebody as Tory as John Bercow to defect to the Labour Party.
I think Keir Starmer is going to find it an extremely mixed blessing. The fact is, John has had Labour Party sympathies for a very, very long time. The wonder to a lot of us was that he hadn't already crossed the floor. So I don't think this is particularly surprising. I don't think it's going to do Labour very much good. And it remains to be seen whether John will end up in the Lords. I don't know.
Yes, I certainly hope not, because I think there will be an awful lot of people in this country who would rather see him end up somewhere else, but that's another story. Let me just finish up, Anne, by asking you about the St Paul's story. St Paul's Girls' School coming out yesterday and claiming, not yesterday, over the weekend, claiming they're doing away with the term head girl. You know, I don't really care what they do, but surely to be consistent, if you're going to do away with the phrase head girl, you have to do away with the title of St Paul's School for Girls, don't you?
Yes, of course you do. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. If you're going to say that the term head girl is unacceptable because it's too binary, then you have to say that the title of the school itself is too binary. Are they going to open up to boys? What are they going to do?
Yeah.
And it is a complete nonsense. And we're in this morass of nonsense for reasons that I don't understand, because it seems to me that all you need is for sensible people to just withdraw support from all of this.
Yes.
And to say, you know, well, look, I actually want my child to go to a school where they recognise that, you know, a man's a man and a woman's a woman.
Well, because perversely, the end result of all of this kind of demarcation is that you end up getting one minority having a go at another minority for not taking account enough of one minority that's over there and another one that's over there and maybe one that might be behind you. And you're kind of going, well, it would be a lot simpler, surely, if you just had St Paul's School for Girls, Cardinal Vaughan School for Boys, where I went. And that's probably pretty straightforward for most parents, isn't it?
It is. And bearing in mind that a lot of parents deliberately want single-sex education for their children, they don't need any confusion about it. They need to know this is a girls' school, this is a boys' school.
Yeah.
But it's just the ludicrous nature of saying, you know, we can't call the head girl the head girl. I mean, why they didn't simply go for head prefect, I don't know, rather than head of school. I mean, that's the head mistress, surely, if I'm allowed to call her the head mistress.
You know, you may not be allowed to. You may not be allowed to do that. But you're absolutely right, because of course now the other thing that I find extraordinary about the way education seems to be going is that the students at university and the pupils at schools seem to now be in charge. You know, certainly it wasn't like that when I was at school.
Yes, I mean, there was a recent upset in the Sunday papers about a teacher who'd been teaching his class how to pronounce Niger.
Right.
And of course, you can imagine the error that he made. And children were encouraged to fill in complaint forms.
Of course.
Fill in complaint forms. I mean, in my day, the teacher would have said, right, keep quiet, get on with the work, you know, and listen because you're learning. Yes,
exactly right. Well, I also saw somebody the other day saying that there's now an excuse you can make for not taking your exams or to doing badly in your exams because you're traumatized by something. So you may have been traumatized by something you read, something you heard on talk radio, something you saw in Anne Widdecombe's column, and you can actually go to your tutor and say, look, I'm too traumatized to do my exams. Can I do them next week?
I absolutely am saying is all this nonsense about triggers. You know, you have to give trigger warnings in case people are going to be upset. Well, if you're going to be upset by it, don't study it.
Yes,
you know,
exactly. Well, you made a great speech, which I tweeted out.
When it is, when it's serious trauma, you know, if you've been in a car crash or something, that's different. But when it is simply that something has offended you, for you to be able to claim trauma, I mean, what sort of nation are we going to become?
I know. It's madness. You made a great speech, which looked as if it was at the Oxford Union, I think. It was going around on Twitter yesterday, and I tweeted it out saying you were coming on today. And you were basically talking about being offended and people having to know that if you are in the public eye, you will be offended. Even if you're not in the public eye, you're likely to be offended by something.
And nobody has the right not to be offended. You know, that is the point. Free speech means that some people will be offended by other people's views. And that is what a democracy is about.
Yes.
And, you know, it's the old adage that you may disagree with somebody profoundly, but you will still defend to the hilt their right to utter that view.
Indeed.
And we're losing sight of that, though I have to say, the Oxford Union, which I thought might go the other way, the Oxford Union voted by a vast majority against no platforming, and good for them. They did that.
finally seeing some light. Well, I'm hoping that the wokery will not last forever, because it can't. Because they can't concentrate on anything for long enough to actually make it happen. So hopefully we will be victorious in the end, Anne. Great to talk to you. We'll look forward to reading your column in the Daily Express on Wednesday, page 13, folks. Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative MP, former Brexit Party MEP as well. Fine, fantastic, upstanding member of society. And you should be